In this episode of the How to Write a Book podcast, I sit down with Larry Onan, author of Intentional Living and Giving and co-creator of the Andy the Ant children's series. Larry shares his unique journey into writing with purpose, balancing faith, intentionality, and creativity. We dive into the process behind writing a book that inspires others, the doubts that often come with wondering, am I the right person to share this message, and the unexpected ways readers have connected with his work. Larry opens up about building confidence as a writer, using your words to help others shine, and embracing the impact your book can have, even with people you may never meet. If you've ever struggled with imposter syndrome, wondered how to align your personal values with your writing, or needed encouragement to keep writing even when confidence feels low, this episode will give you clarity and inspiration.
Welcome to the How to Write a Book podcast. I'm Maciel, writer, certified book coach, and your go-to guide for beating writer's block and getting your book done. Master the art of pitching, publishing, and thriving. Your author journey starts here. For more resources, tips, and support, visit howtowriteabookpodcast.com. So grab a notebook, open that document, and let's get writing. Hello and welcome back to the How to Write a Book podcast. Today, I'm happy to welcome Larry Onan. Larry, how are you today?
I'm doing well today out here in warm, hot Southern California.
Likewise. We're super excited to have you. You are the author of Intentional Living and Giving, as well as like a co-author or co-inspiration for Andy the Ant, right? A children's series.
Yeah, they're two different kinds of books, very different worlds there between what a kid wants to read and what a kid wants to see and what an adult wants to read. So, yeah, they're two different worlds.
Amazing. I'm excited to dive into the world of writing that you've been a part of, as well as your background. So before we do that, Larry, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience? Who are you and your book?
Well, I'm a grandpa, for one thing. I got 6 grandkids, so I've been around for quite a little while. That's what that means. I'm a graduate of the University of Colorado, and I thought I was going to be going into theater and acting and directing and all that stuff. In fact, I spent most of my college career doing that until I had an abrupt change, and I decided to get out of college on time, and I had to switch to another major. So I went to the School of Education and got a major in English and theater arts, and they thought I was going to become a secondary speech coach and theater coach and all that. I never did any of that, but I do have English in my background, and it did teach me a number of things on how to use the English language, not how to use any other language, but just the English language. And I really had no plans of writing anything when I first started. It was just more I was on a mission, and I wanted to make sure things were successful there. But over a course of time, I got into fund development. And one of the tasks in fund development is writing appeals and writing letters. And so I started using my old English education in another very creative way that the University of Colorado never dreamed I would be doing. And I've written many, many things over the years. Now, as far as writing books, that wasn't really my focus. I was writing funding proposals. I was writing documents that major contributors could consider. And so there was a whole process to writing those tools. And those tools were usually 2 to 3 pages, and you had to pack an awful lot of content to where you could convince a person in 2 pages that they wanted to become more involved in these major projects. Well, in the process, I also got into changing from what I call fundraising to fund development, because it was in that case, a spiritual journey to understand what biblical stewardship really was. Many people think stewardship is all about money. And stewardship really has something to do with money, but stewardship is basically a steward is a person that manages somebody else's affairs. So I got into understanding that, and that ended up creating a book that I wrote in the 1980s that was about that subject. And I thought I was done with it until 3 years ago when I was with a group in Ireland And they were talking about the need to have something that was relevant and could be understood by anybody in the European context. And I thought, I got to dust off what I started on in 1980. And so the book Intentional Living and Giving is really a continuation of what I started doing in the 80s, but now with a new generation, a Z generation, a younger thought process. How you write today and how you wrote 35 years ago is actually a little bit different. So that is the way I got into this. So yes, I'm a writer, but I'm really a coach and a mentor and a teacher and an instructor and a coach and a pusher and a shover and everything else that goes along with the package. And then the writing content is really a process of how do you take thought and put it into articulated written format so that it can live beyond what's in your brain and live in the context of the written word. So that's really how I got into it. Now, that's the adult side of me. Years ago, I also got into telling bedtime stories to my kids. I have two daughters, and at the time when one was about 3 years of age, she wanted me to tell her, or she was wanting, I thought I was going to read her a story. It was a common thing for dad to lay down and read a story and put it on the shelf. The kid would fall asleep and dad would be done. And that particular night, my 51-year-old now said to me at 3, Dad, I want you to tell me a story. And I laid there in the darkness and thinking, what do I say next? And then I remembered in the book of Proverbs in the Bible, there's 2 verses that talk about ants. And one of those verses in a kid's form would be, watch the ant and learn of his ways, for though he's tiny, he's mighty in many ways. So I started off by, once upon a time, there was an ant, and my daughter interrupted me and she said, what's his name? Well, I had no idea what to call him. And I thought, what rhymes with ant? And I had a guy working for me named Andy. So I said, his name was Andy Ant. And she says, oh, great. What did he do? Well, that began a series of values and stories that would help my daughter live with consequences of behavior, because I was introducing her to Andy Ant and what he did. And he lived in the front yard in our house and all this kind of stuff. So there was a story development based on a proverb that helped my daughter understand faith and values. And that's where that came all from. I never thought we'd ever create any of those books. They were just bedtime stories. And then it was probably 10 years later that my brother and I, he lives in Colorado, we joined venture together, and he said, I'll write the books if you'll figure out how to market the books. And he got really interested because he had 2 daughters, and he was also telling Andy Ant stories. And so the series of the adventures of Andy Ant are authored by my brother. And you would ask the question, how do you write books? Every one of those books, he is the personification of the little boy that plays a very key part in those books. And so they're really life experiences that he had as a kid. But it's turned in, he wrote them in first person as Joseph Tyler Johnson, the main boy character. And then Andy Ant is the philosopher and the teacher of doing good things and the consequences of doing bad things, and the whole series of the adventures of Andy Ant. But those are 2,500 word stories that would be from a 3 to a 9-year-old. About the time that the kids move into chapter books in school where there's no more pictures, they would move out of Andy, and they would also realize that ants don't talk by then. But Andy and Joey are best friends in the series of Andy Ant, and it's a day in the life of those 2 characters. But in writing those books, and even in telling the stories, I was relating what my daughter lived through when I was just telling stories to the consequences of what I wanted her to understand in her own life. Now, some of them were stupid as could be, but some of them had a lot of meaning to it. And I taught my daughter that way. Then I had a second daughter, and she liked Andy Ant. And then along came my brother, and his 2 kids loved Andy Ant. So Andy is, probably 55 years old now, but he's still a 4th grade ant. But that's a series of books that's available through my website, or one of the websites. But those books there, I think when people are saying, how do you write? It's interesting. I think sometimes people think that you sit down and start typing at a computer. Ideas just flow. I think ideas and book stories, especially in the adult educational side, I'm not too sure how to write fiction because I've never stepped into that. But in these kind of books that we're talking about, whether it's the kid side or the adult side, It's based on a lot of life experience and illustrations from my life, even in the intentional living and giving. Almost every chapter opens with a illustration that is probably my life story illustration, something that happened to me, and then how do I apply that to the content that I'm really wanting to teach.
Yeah.
So I don't dive in and just start typing and hoping that magical words fall on the page. And over the years, I've learned that you have to dig a lot to get your content. And sometimes it takes 2 or 3 years of percolation before you're really ready to start structuring something in the written format. Now, I have books I've started that are just full of ideas, and they're paragraphs, and I know someday I could use them. And I know even how I would apply them, but I'm not ready to turn it into a book yet. But I'm collecting as I think. So if there's a life experience that taught you something, can you just write the life experience, 2 or 3 or 4 paragraphs? Can you make it sound like a story? It may be a story, it may be an article, it may be nothing. But what you're starting to do, I have a really strong conviction. One of the things I've taught for years, if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. So a person's got to start letting their thoughts go onto paper, or you're just thinking up ideas, and ideas are frankly pretty cheap. But when you start to structure it, it starts to say, does this make sense to me? How can I make it better? It's a hobby more now, but I go back sometimes and rewrite stuff that I wrote 2 years ago just to make it better.
Yeah.
But I still don't know how I'm going to use it other than it's a good story. But it may fit in something else that I've got to write next month or a year from now. So in writing, what I would call in my book, Intentional Living and Giving, is in what would be called the faith genre. It's teaching principles. It's a 17-chapter book, and 9 chapters are what you'd call biblical teaching. And it unpacks a principle of stewardship and the 5 critical points of that. Then the latter half of the book is asking the questions, how does this apply to your life, and how do you live every day using what you've decided you're going to be? In the Z generation culture, they want to get right to the bottom line right now.
Right.
You know, beforehand, you could wander through a book and you could have important things in chapter 18. My editors that I've worked with says, people want to get to the bottom line quickly. If they can get to the bottom line, they can apply it, and they may not finish your book. Because if they get the idea how to do it, they'll take off on their own. But if you get it to a place where you've got practical, here's how you use it, put it there for them after you've already, in a sense, taught them what you want to know. But I think it all begins with ideas and life experience. And how does that life experience lead into, a story, a principle, 4 or 5 steps to the principle. And I just realized it takes time to formulate those things.
Yeah, I love that the journey that you've taken to create a book that's just substantial, that is really intentional. Now, you've mentioned a couple of times that you have dove into your process, you've made things come up, you really wanted to figure out where you were going. But could you be a little bit more detailed on what that looked like? Did that mean that you were working like with a book coach, or you had printed out your outline and you were getting feedback, So I'm curious, that deep dive, what did that look like specifically for you?
Well, in the Andy Ant style books, we're talking about creating a family of ants. My brother and I even did a diagnostics on each of their personality profiles so that 5 years or 10 years later, we can maintain the continuity of their personality. So we knew what each of the ants not look like visually. That's another story into itself. But because they're all illustrated books by a guy that worked with Walt Disney for 21 years. He was one of the early illustrators in the Walt Disney World before Walt even created Disneyland. And so and when he said I worked for Walt Disney, he means he worked for Walt Disney for 21 years. He was 16 years old when he had his first job of creating the 3 Little Pigs. But he was an illustrator. Okay, that's all he was. He took ideas and then he illustrated what he read on paper. I think what we did is we thought, okay, if we're going to have a a new family that we've never met before. What's the character of Andy versus his best friend, Dictor Ant, versus his mom aunt and dad aunt, and his brother Parker, the nerd aunt, and his sister, the violinist. And that aunt plays a violin, but she's 3 years older, and she's in the middle school, and she's a little snooty, and she's acting like a middle schooler. So we will never be able, we could go back and write more Andy Ant books, and we could go back to their character development, because we want to maintain those characters in their purity. Now, that's thinking through a detail of saying, okay, if we're going to bring into our world this ant family along with a human family as well, because there's a family that lives in the house and the family that lives under the front steps of the porch. But that is thinking through strategy. That's not my brother writing books. It's helping him figure out who the personalities were that we were using. And then he stepped into those books and started writing in the first person. And although his name is Onan, like mine, he became Joseph Tyler Johnson, a fourth grade boy. And his relationship with Andy was like a relationship to a kid's dog. And they were best friends. And so he became that personality. And he can tell you, if you talk to him, that's how this story came about. This was my cousin doing X. We were doing this together, and this happened, and here's the consequences. And what he did is he took the very basic core of life, and then by transforming it into a boy and an ant, the story runs the same as it did when he was living it when he was 9 or 10 years of age, because he just became the personality. Now, he knew he was trying to teach certain things in each book. He wanted to bring out certain outcomes. It wasn't a free-for-all wondering how I'm going to finish this story.
Yeah.
But we were committed also to a day in the life story. So the story had to begin in the morning, and it had to end at night when Joey was going to bed, and he would reflect on what he and Andy Ant learned together. So we had some parameters that we laid down in doing that. But then within those parameters, my brother took off as author. I never sat there. We would brainstorm ideas. There's a few of stories that are close to what I told my kids, but they're not. Jerry didn't teach my kids those things. Andy, for as an example, played baseball because there were kids playing baseball. But when we started creating Andy Ant, we thought baseball is not universal. So we changed it to soccer because it is a universal game for kids. So Andy Ant's soccer team is in the stories, not Andy Ant's baseball team, because baseball would be basically Japan and the United States. I mean, that's where it's predominant. So you do think through the parameters, but those come as you work on the idea. It's not that we had everything finished out, and he went through more drafts of stories before he got to where he wanted to be. But probably the first draft of the story and the 10th draft had an awful lot in common. He was just refining it and making it work in the context of the story. All that time, we had no idea what Andy Ant ever looked like. We visually never saw him. He was not a character in our mind that we could say, okay, that's Andy. It was through an international art contest that we found the illustrator that had worked for Walt Disney for 21 years, and he ended up being selected as the one that did 125 original pieces of art for the entire series. But that was a illustrating aspect of now taking the 2,500 word story that a mom and dad could read to their kids, and the kids are far more fascinated by the illustrations than they are by the words. But I had grandkids that could almost repeat word for word the stories, and they don't even know how to read yet. The pictures match the story. So they've heard the story read to them, and they can act like they're reading the book, and they don't know how to read those words yet because they're into it that well, and they're all down to the level of a 3 to 9 year old kid. They're all written in that language. Now, in the adult book side, I have collected a lot of illustrations of life over what I've done for 40 years. And over the years, I've continued to write a lot of those things down, experiences with major partners or experiences that I had that I thought would fit in someplace. I sometimes used them as speaking illustrations when I would be lecturing. And yet those things were captured. So when it came to now putting that story into writing, I had to concisely tell it in maybe 2.5 to 3 pages. That was the introduction to an 18-page chapter in the book.
Yeah.
It was a segue. But I think for people that want to write, start writing. Start to see what comes out of your head. Start with what you know, and it probably is going to be what you know as an individual.
Yeah. And so you've talked about the process that your brother has gone through with Andy the Ant, and your process with intentional living and giving. Now, did you or your brother, but I'm curious more about your faith-based book, did you run into a wall that you were like, who am I to share this voice? Am I the right person? Am I doing this message justice?
Oh.
Did you? Yeah.
Every author, I think, starts to think, I'm not really worthy of saying anything.
Yeah.
This is really bad content. Who would ever want my content? I think I better stop this and just do something else. I bumped into that kind of stuff a lot. And there would be times when I say, I've got to write a chapter and finish this, and I have no clue where I'm going to go with it. Now, that doesn't mean that in my writing, I don't think through in scribbled notes. Here's the 3 points I want to teach. Here's some more points that could fit into here. So I'm making really, I call them skeletal outlines because they're not detailed. Mm-hmm. But they're enough to remind me what to do. I'm getting ready to do a series of blogs about getting a cornea transplant, which is due to me pretty soon. And I wanted to do a series about how I ended up with a disease called keratoconus. Well, I've already outlined that to where I can talk about it, but it's outlined in bullets. And then I can refine the bullets to make them sequential so that I don't get out of sync. It takes preparation to do writing. It takes some preparation to do blogging. Yeah. In the writing, you may say, this does not fit where I put it. It really belongs in a different chapter. And so I've been able to I've spent maybe 3 or 4 days working on something and decide it does not belong here, but it's not bad content. It just doesn't fit with the flow of what I'm doing.
Right.
I think sometimes you need to have an outline so that you can destroy your outline.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, because now your outline becomes refined as you're thinking, I wouldn't take it this way. I thought this was the way I was going to do it. And this really belongs before this, and this needs to be here. And there's a better illustration that helps me do this here. And I need to study this some more before I can write that section. So I think it's a collaborative thing with your brain and your hands to create the content. And content for me in this kind of genre is content that is life transformational. Mm-hmm. The content of the book, it got released last June. It may look like a new book, but I've been living that life for 45, 50 years because I was assigned the task of figuring out something that nobody in the room had an answer to. Mm-hmm. And it was like, we've got to have this figured out, but we don't know what it is. Let's assign it to Larry. I realized I was the low man on the totem pole in that particular meeting. And it was kind of like assigned to me so they would move on to another subject. Oh. But in my life, I'm a very high responsibility person. So when I wrote down, figure out what biblical lifestyle stewardship is, I wrote underneath it, Larry, you always got the freedom to fail. I did not know what I was even tackling. Now, nobody came back to me and said, how are you coming on your assignment? That really convinced me that nobody really cared if there was an assignment. It was more of a, let's get on with the task of working on this bigger project. But in getting into the task, and I never did it by myself, I drew my leaders of my various departments that I was working with, and I said, we got to figure out this together. It might help us do our job better. And so I collaborated with 4 or 5 other guys for probably 6 months on figuring out what this content would be. And then we started teaching it in seminars. We were not writing it in a book. We turned it into a seminar, and executives and leaders would come in and go to the seminar and be blessed by it. and make transformative decisions. And I thought that was what I'd be doing, would be teaching it in the context of that. Well, it was later that it came into the other form. But is Larry Onan's content? No, not really. It was a collaboration of 6 months of work to refine what we wanted to teach. And then later on, I thought this has got to go into a written format. I got to apply it in that context. I did that in the early 80s, and it had its window of opportunity. That's what I basically did when I said this content is so critical that I need to refresh the entire idea and get it ready for another generation. So are the books similar? Well, in some ways, my original book and the content of the new book have got a lot of similarities, but it's for a totally different generational. I'm not writing it for 80-year-olds.
Yeah.
I'm writing it for 20-year-olds that are just coming out of college and are confused about who they are.
Yeah.
I'm writing it for people that think life is stressful and I'm a failure and I don't even know why I'm here.
Right.
And so when I'm thinking, okay, that's who I'm writing to, is a person that feels failure in life and is frustrated that life does not have a lot of purpose and meaning.
Yeah.
But if I know who I am and I start to understand how I was created in the first place, and I can thrive in doing what I was created to do, now I can help. I'm helping you and I'm helping other people connect with what life is all about. So on the book, it says discovering purpose and igniting abundance and learning to thrive as a steward of God's blessing. Well, you're learning to thrive in life rather than be frustrated in life. So that, the byline of it is finding why you're alive.
Yeah.
And then living it. Now, it's a fun book to pick up and read, and people have enjoyed it a lot. But it is really packaging content that I hope will be transforming a life. So all the time that I was working on the book, I was thinking, how is this going to help the reader that I never will meet in Botswana or in Africa or in the USA, in Chicago, wherever they're at?
Yeah.
Because I feel like there's content that can outlive me.
And
This a lot of time after I'm gone. And I think people need to realize that if they're called to write, they're called to deliver something that's meaningful and purposeful to the life of somebody else.
Yeah.
So I think you're on a mission.
Yeah.
And there's not many people out there that are going to become writers per se. But it may be an article that you end up writing for a local journal. Writing does not mean you got to write a book.
Right. Yeah.
I've written thousands of pages of other kinds of copy that have never been bound into a book.
Yeah. And all of that has reached somebody and somebody has read that. And, I am curious as well, you were called to write this book. Was there, and you're also talking about people who, you may never meet them. They will read your book, you'll never know about it. But has there been an instance where somebody's read your book and their results were surprising to you, or maybe somebody random that you never thought was going to reach out to you? Any other unexpected outcomes?
Well, when we were first teaching it in seminars, I had an executive couple that had retired from their business, and he had retired with a lot of money. He'd done very well in life, and he was able, and his goal was he wanted to now go into, quote, ministry and help other peers. And he came to this seminar. He had just retired, sold his business, made a nice little pile. And at the end of that weekend, I taught about 3 hours or 4 hours of this content. He came to me and he said, this has been kind of transformative because we came here with the intention of doing X. And God has told us this weekend that we're to go back into business because we know how to make money. And as a steward, I know how to do that well. And I'm committed to restarting a new business. I want to make money that I can give away. I don't need money. He said, I've been blessed by that. But he said, as a result of what you've taught me, I'm going back into business. And he went back and started a different business, completely detached from what he had done in the past. In a matter of 3 to 4 years, it had become very successful. He spent 4 or 5 years getting it off the dime and sold that business and made more money. But in the meantime, the whole purpose of him making money was so he could leverage and give it to the right places where he felt like we're making the biggest difference.
Wow.
And then he retired again. And then he commented to me about 5 or 6 years later, I'm retiring the second time. This time I want to go play and I want to go into ministry and help influence other people's lives. Well, he was influencing lives all the time, but it was a transformational experience that said, what you just told me is what I've got to go do. Now, I've seen people that once they pick up on this content, and in my career as a fund development coach and consultant, I worked with high-end major partners. I did not work in direct mail or small gifts. And so when people pick up the concepts and they realize that they are created in many cases to be very successful in making resources, but that none of it's theirs in the first place. It's not their money. They're stewards of somebody else's money. Yeah. And when they start to realize that, their generosity goes off the charts. And a person that believes what is in that content thinks, okay, I'm created to generate wealth. How much wealth can I generate to give away? Yeah. So I know one guy, his goal was to give 100 million away. And before he died, he exceeded that. He set up a foundation where it's still giving money. I know people that said, my business is a cash cow. It competes with other big businesses. And I've realized that I'm setting on something that I don't own anyway. So my job is to make sure that it's well spent. And I think in a 5-year period, he gave over $50 million away to not one cause, but to numerous causes that he felt were leveraging outcomes. So this is not, when you write something, it may be changing a person's life. Yeah. It's transforming, making a difference to where their life is radically different. And they live with themselves knowing that they are doing what they should be doing. But it's, there's 100 things to give away. The book talks about, there's one chapter in Intentional Living and Giving about money because everybody expects this book to be about money.
Right. Yeah.
About chapter 16, I said, you've probably been wondering how money fits into the picture. Let's talk about money. So we go into money and the history of giving money just because people expect a book that relates to stewardship to be something about money. But that's long before, by that time, they know there's over 100 things they can give away today that it's not money. So now let's just apply it to one more thing. I think there's an Old Testament. It comes out of one of the books. The book of Deuteronomy is in the front Old Testament portion. If you're into the Jewish faith, that is the basics of all Scripture. That's what they call the Pentateuch. And it was God's instruction to the Israel people. And he was telling them about money in Deuteronomy. And he said, I'll give you a paraphrase of it. God says, I don't need your money. I'm asking you to give money because you need to keep me first in all things. So it wasn't about giving God money. It was so I keep you first in all things, because if you focus on that, it makes a big difference to how you see things. God's saying, I don't need money, but you need to give it because in doing so, you're keeping me first in all things.
It's like, I don't know. I'm not going to get the right scripture, but you can't have two masters, right? It's Jesus or money, God or money. So you can't obey both.
Yeah,
right?
You can't obey both, but you got to realize where one's the source and one can be applied to help change the world.
Yeah. And
your money can make a big difference. You can help a soup kitchen in your local town by buying food to help the poor. I chair a board of a little school network in the Philippines. And these are little kids in the poorest of the poor barangay of the Philippines. And we've got 12 or 14 schools going on over there right now. They're jumpstarting kids that would have no advantage to get an education in their educational track. Yeah. We have a spiritual objective, but the first thing we want to do is make sure that they can read and compete with everybody else in school. Mm-hmm. But the goal of that, now when you invest $35 a month in a kid, you're paying for his education, for his teacher, for his classroom, for his uniform, for everything that he needs, snacks every day. You're paying for all of that. But what you're really doing is getting a kid to jumpstart his life of success in the Philippines.
Yeah.
Well, I give to that, and I like to get people to give to it, not because I'm just desperate for money, but because it's transforming a little kid's life.
Yeah.
And so, even the money there is making a big difference in that little kid's life.
Love that.
And preschooler, he's a preschooler. He's still probably crying and wanting mommy to come and get him, type of stuff.
I know I wasn't that age.
Well, that's where, but if you help a kid get started right, you can give him the future. Yeah. So, and the writing side, I wrote the brochures and the content for everything that we use to teach Little Feet and Friends. That's not writing a book. It's writing communication content so people that don't live in the Philippines can begin to comprehend how they can help a kid in the Philippines. That's writing, and you may never write a book, but you may have the right way of communicating how to help people in our community that are really homeless and need help.
Yeah. Love that.
Now, in my book, I tell you also what not to give to. So I help a person think through as a steward to not get caught up in the marketing, but be able to ask the right questions to make the right decisions in asking. Well, that is instructive. Here's 3 principles. Here's 4 principles that help you make the decision to where you give your money. And so when you get into the how-tos over here, you say, okay, there are 6 principles that I can follow in making good decisions, and I don't feel guilty by saying no.
Right. Yeah.
Now you feel like, oh, if I don't give money at the top of the off-ramp on the freeway, I'm guilty. No, you're not guilty. There's better ways to help him than that. So a good steward does not throw money away. Well, I've developed it. That chapter is developed after you understand the principles. If I'd put that in the first page or 2 of the book, it wouldn't have made much sense.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
When I get into the part of how you give wisely, okay, I can tell you how to do that. But it comes as a result of you understanding the core principles, not just the how-tos. So in writing adult books, you've got a lot of times say, I'm wanting to help a person know these principles. I want to help them get through these process. Now, how do I make it attractive enough that they will stick with me to where I can teach the principles? It's interesting. I've had people in the last year say, I'm into the chapter about X, and they use the illustration that's in the chapter to show me where they're at.
Yeah.
Because the illustration sticks with them. It's a story. Now, from the story, I can get into 3 principles, but it's not just going into 3 principles. It's segueing into the life story applied to the context of these principles. And so it's been really interesting. They don't say I'm in chapter 7 or I'm in chapter 12. They say, I'm in the story about you getting a permanent in your hair one time and how you laughed yourself silly. So I know right where they're at because they remember the story, and people respond to stories and life experiences over and over again. If individuals that are caught trying to figure out how to write, just start writing your life story in pieces. Maybe there's a story there. Maybe there's something that's going to develop. I'm really big on helping them, thinking in little bite-sized pieces, and don't worry about the outcome.
Yeah.
The outcome may be just, I need a 8-paragraph deal for our newsletter and our housing development. Well, write it. See what it sounds like when you put it in writing.
Yeah.
It may be terrible, but you will learn from it. But the more you write, the more confident you feel. I think there's also an element there. And you're not going to become a super duper great writer until you've written a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And that's a really good piece for writers to take away. It's like, if you're feeling unconfident, keep writing, write a lot, because that's going to lead. That's to your confidence. There's so many, I feel like, nuggets of wisdom that you've shared, and one of the things that I wrote down here is my notes, because you're exuding this, is to shine. Like, that's what I feel like. You're asking people and showing people to shine with your words, with the ability to view themselves with, like, here's my purpose, here's what I'm going to do. So that's what I feel like. Your book is allowing people to shine. So yeah, thank you.
Let people shine and make it simple enough that they understand it. What I've discovered in working with many of my clients in the nonprofit world is that they understand their common goal. They understand their big vision. I'm working with one group back in the East Coast of one of the Ivy League schools right now, and they write academically. Nobody in their right mind that's not academically can read academic material. It is so highbrow. It's big words. It's 12th grade language. It's 14th grade language. They think in a world that's differently, and they communicate that way. Now, luckily, I had experience years ago working in one of the Ivy League schools, so I was around that highbrow thinking process a lot. And I said, I want you to write what you think is true. Write this down for me. Use this format. And they worked on it, and they came back to me, and I said, now you've given me content that I can turn it in. I can dumb it down for the average person to understand. I'm not dumbing it down because I don't appreciate the intellect. But I want the business person that is not academic to really understand what you're wanting to do.
Yeah.
It probably took us 4 to 6 months of dialogue to where it became simplified enough that a typical executive business couple could look at it and say, I know what you're talking about. Because it started off in a academic culture of white papers and doctoral theses and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Well, there's an audience that would want to read that, but many doctorate theses are never read after they're written.
Yeah.
Because there's a book that I train people, and I coach churches and I coach nonprofits on governance and how to do governance for their nonprofit. And there's a book that I highly admired that was written in 1990. But I tell people you'll never need to read this book because it is so academically overwhelming that you'll fall asleep before you ever get to the content. But I want to train you how to use what this guy did in 1990 that transformed governance for nonprofit organizations. Oh. So it is now being used in very practical sense, but hardly anybody reads the original treatise that introduced the ideas that became very practical 20 years later. And many nonprofits are using the very core of that book that was written in 1990, but they don't know that's where it came from because they needed to read something that was simplified enough that they could get it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And it worked well for academic. It changed the course of many boards in the United States. But it was a beginning of application. And I've got to teach a person that's really running the soup kitchen and is concerned about the hungry how to run the nonprofit organization from a governing level.
Yeah.
They will never catch it for his book, but they will catch it with other material and coaching and mentoring around the same core principles. Yeah. So you've got a lot of times say, I may have ideas, but I'm not going to be the one that's going to deliver it to everybody. But if I can get the idea started, if I can put things in print, I got a friend that does a lot more writing than I do, but he said the first 10 years of his life, he never wrote anything more than 3 or 4 pages. He was writing articles for magazines. He was contributing content in short form. He was even contracted to write content for them. But he says, as I began to do that, I realized I really liked writing, and I learned from my process to where now he's probably written 5 or 6, very good books and maybe more than that. But it was a process that got him there, and he was happy to do the short articles and the short stuff before he was ready to dive into 256 pages of something. I think sometimes it really hurts the author that doesn't realize this. Once you're finished, you've got to turn it over to an editor that really scraps it.
Yeah.
The editorial side is now making it really friendly. I am too close to my original content to be a judge on it.
Yeah.
And then I've got to get an editor to come in, and I've got to get him to clean it up. And it's going to cost me because he's thinking about how it reads. I was thinking about what the content was. And then after you get it edited, you've got to go to a copy editor that says, now we're going to turn it into a book-looking content. And that is a different level of editing altogether. Intentional Living and Giving, I think it took him a week to do the copy editing. And it was much cheaper at that level. And she didn't care what the content was. She was really good at copy editing. She got it ready to go to the publisher.
That's fast.
But before then, I had a guy that worked with me for 4 months on chapter by chapter. I'm challenging this, read this again. You didn't quite say this right. This is a better way of expressing yourself. I've taken out stuff here because it's not relevant. And that hurts my feelings.
Yeah. Yeah.
My content is important.
Mm-hmm.
And I think many people that think they've got something to say are not ready to let somebody really be the coach that makes it really clean.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's a different kind of editor, and you typically pay to have that kind of help done. And they don't really care about your content. They're just trying to make it presentable to the audience that you're trying to reach.
Right. Yeah.
So after you've written, you've got to turn it over to somebody else. I think even in the genre of fiction books, you may have a great person that's writing and getting all the credit, but behind him is one or two other people that made it readable.
Right. A whole team.
And we always say, well, that's my content. Well, I know I can go back and take you to my computer and show you content that I wrote, and you can compare it and say it's about 80% there, Larry, but it's not the same. Because I was willing to be put to the woodshed to make it better. Now, everybody likes it the way it is, not because it's what I did, but they all think I did it. But what I had to do is I had to get some coaching and helping and expertise that's not me.
Yeah.
I was good at the idea development and the concepts and the storytelling. And he never took it far away from where I was at. He didn't turn it into something else. But when I look at it that way, I think, man, this is really good. I never knew I could write this well.
I love it. Looking back.
So a writer has got to realize that when you get into it and you get good people working around you, they're going to help you make stuff better.
Amazing.
And your role could be one thing. And the copy editor, I'm glad I don't have that job. I don't know how anybody could be a copy editor. But that is the copy that turns it into one step away from going to the print press.
Yeah.
And you've got to have that all the way through. And there's rules all over the place for that world. Mm-hmm. But they know what they're doing, so let them go do it well. And they don't change their content. They just rearrange everything to make it come out right. Exactly. And then you're really impressed because it looks like you wrote a book. Up till then, you've just written on computers.
Now, it sounds like you had a good time with this process. Does that mean that you have another project in the works, or do you feel like your journey is good with this book?
You will always hear that the way you become a good author is keep on writing. You'll hear that from many people. I'm not so concerned about that. I got 4 more books by title in my computer. Nice. I could get into any of them and go further. Maybe it's my age. Maybe it's my season in life. I don't know what's going to happen to those. Because with the book writing, you've got to realize you're giving birth to something.
Yeah.
And many times you don't write a book and it becomes famous. You write a book and then you've got to work for the rest of your life in promoting the story to get that book read.
Yeah.
So I shifted from writing to marketing, frankly, because I want intentional living and giving out there in many different genres around the world. So I've got to continue to do that. So I've done, it's not the writing side of it, but I probably have done 25 podcasts since June last year on many different venues so that people know that the book is out there. I know it's going to help them if they get to it, but they don't know it's out there. So you got to shift gears. And do I want to shift gears back to writing more? Well, yes and no. One thing 3 years ago, my daughters asked me, Dad, I always hear these stories. You've got stories about all the way through life. Can you start writing those stories down so we can have them and the grandkids can have them, the grandkids can pass them on to somebody else? And I started writing those kind of things. They're 1 to 4 paragraph reflections. Now, I don't think it's a book, but it is a book. I don't think I'm going to get an editor to go through them again. My kids can take it the way I delivered it. I may be passing it on with a PDF format and say, here's the book of Grandpa and his 5 seasons of life. That's a book that I'm enjoying putting together because it's good for me to reflect on lessons that I learned in life. And there will be a few places where I will lift out 1 or 2 chapters of intentional living and giving, because it's a story of my life at a particular time. And it fits over in that genre.
Yeah.
But it also fits over in intentional living and giving because it helps introduce another principle. So yeah, I'm always probably writing, but I'm editing other people's copy a lot to help them in other things. So that's a season question.
Nice. Yeah.
Person says I should be writing. First of all, are you writing something every week? I don't know if every day is common.
Yeah.
I'm always writing something, and I'm thankful for GPs. All the technology, AI that's out there. A lot of that stuff is helping me become a better writer. I use Grammarly a great deal, and it is now going in with AI and giving me better alternatives to sentences. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
I don't feel like they're destroying my content. They're just saying, if you rearranged it, it's going to read better.
Yeah.
We got to learn into the technology, and we can become better writers than we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, because technology can help us do that. But I don't know if I'm aiming to another book, at least immediately. But yes, I could go back to those subjects that I've got outlined and got content with. A number of years ago, 10 years ago, my wife died of a glioblastoma brain tumor. Well, there's a lot of people that don't know how to process the grieving issue of losing somebody. And yet I've been pretty good at doing that. So there's some content I should probably write about how you deal with processing terminal disease. I think it would help a lot of people, but it also ties into a real life story. Mm-hmm. So it's my wife's story of how she got this one weekend. We discovered it, and 18 months later, she was gone. Mm-hmm. Because that's just what happens with a glioblastoma. Mm-hmm. People don't realize that is what's called a terminal disease in medicine. And now it's how you manage it. Well, how do you manage it as an individual? How do you manage it for the person that's got it? Mm-hmm. How do you manage life after a death?
Yeah.
If you're older, how do you manage it into the second? How do you get yourself unstuck when everything stops? Well, there's another book side of me in there that says there's something there I need to put together. I've ticked at it, but I'm not trying to write that book today. I'm not in a passionate mode that it's got to get done right now.
Yeah.
But I should be working on parts of it because I may be led to go ahead and do that.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Love that.
I think if you're putting yourself under a pressure of, I got to write today because, if I don't write, it's over. But what can I write today that reflects what I learned yesterday or what I learned through this experience? Mm-hmm. Can I put an ending to it that says, here's lessons I learned from this experience? Maybe you're going through a really traumatic divorce and you're now 3 years away from it, and you can start to say, I failed here. I did this there. We both messed up here. Can we start to say what came out of the process? Otherwise, we're stuck and we can't get over it. And many times the writing lets a person release themselves from the chapter that's been bugging them.
Yes.
One of the first things I did probably a year after my wife died is I wrote her a letter. It was a letter to say goodbye. Ultimately, we had a great 45 years. I remember all these things, but I need to move on, and you've already moved on. You've changed addresses. I understand that. But for right now, I'm gonna move on with and do what I feel like I'm called to do. I'll see you later.
Yeah.
That became a chapter closer for me.
Yeah.
So even if you don't write it for publishing, sometimes writing it helps you process and move to the next chapter of your life. Mm. I encourage people that need to get it down. You don't have to get it down perfectly. Nobody's going to read it unless you want them to. Nobody's ever seen that letter. Yeah. But it was a letter that I needed to have for closure so I could move on with life.
Right. Yeah.
So writers, just write.
I love that. Thank you so much, Larry. And I think that I'm looking at the time. I think we're just about out of time, but this has been fantastic because I feel like you've had a new perspective on writing. I know a lot of people on the show, everyone has amazing things to say, but I think you've put it in a way that's new, a way that people who might not have let it sunk in, it's sinking in now, So no, thank you so much for sharing this. Now, of course, where can people find you, find Andy Ant, find your work, and follow you?
Well, I'll help them with a couple of things. If you want to get a hold of Intentional Living and Giving, you can go to Barnes & Noble, you can go to Amazon, any place you find books in this world. If you wanted a signed copy, you can go to larryonan.com, and I'll sign copies and send them that way. But there's nothing magical in a signed copy. I mean, it just, some people like it, some people don't care.
I do love it.
But because this is going to transform your life. This is principles of living. And it's got to, then after you've got the principles down, I'll take you through 9 more chapters and how you apply it really well. Intentional Living and Giving. So that's available any place. The 2 books that are probably the most popular right now are these 2 here. This is Andy Ant, called Lawnmower on the Loose. That's Andy's soccer team being mowed down. And then the other one is A Swimming Hole Disaster. And these 2 books, you'd have to go to andyant.com, andyant, ANDYANT.com, and you can find all 8 of Andy Ant's books there. They're not available except under probably resale and used books through Amazon and places like that. And you could go out there, but you can just Google Andy Ant, and you'll probably come up to you. There's a few more Andy Ants out there besides this one. I've discovered people picked up on the name other places. But Andy Ant's got 8 books in his series. Wow. And all 8 of the books are there, but these are the 2 that are most often picked up. Andy Ant's Lawnmower on the Loose introduces you to how Joey, the boy, 4th grade boy, met Andy Ant in the first place.
So cute.
And this one is when Joey said he's going to watch Andy swim in the gutter on the sidewalk, and Joey gets preoccupied, and we lose Joey down the city drain, or not Joey, we learn Andy. So the consequences of behavior, if you're not doing the right thing, you got to live with the consequences of your behavior. Both books are they're great to teach. They're fun and they're adventuresome, but it tells the parent right on the book what you're trying to help your kid learn.
Well,
and the kid never sees it, but he gets all caught up in the fantastic illustrations of the illustrator that we had do it. So that's andyant.com. But if you want to get Intentional Living and Giving, just go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or a million books. You pick it, they got it.
Well, thank you so much, Larry Onan. This has been fantastic. From the How to Write a Book podcast, it has been amazing to have you here. And we're looking forward to reading Intentional Living and Giving. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Yeah, I'm glad that we could be a part of this today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey writers, if you're feeling stuck or unsure where to start with your book, I've got some exciting news. I offer a variety of coaching packages to help you move from idea to finished manuscript. But today I want to focus on my starter packages. With packages like Outline Sprint, Chapter Review, Manuscript Quick Audit, and Dictation Jumpstart, you get actionable feedback, clarity on your story, and guidance to help you take the next steps, all without committing to a full program up front. If you're curious and want to see which package is right for you, head over to howtowriteabookpodcast.com. You can learn more about each option, check out the details, and even schedule a no-cost, no-gimmick call to see if my coaching is the right fit. Take that first step toward moving your book forward today. You don't have to do it alone.
Thanks for tuning in to the How to Write a Book podcast. I'm Maciel, here to help you write, pitch, and publish your book. Get expert resources at howtowriteabookpodcast.com. Follow me on Instagram at Maciel Writes. And if you enjoyed the show, leave a review to help more writers find us. Until next time, happy writing.